Royston, Hertfordshire, England, 2002. A man sits alone in a house. His wife is dying. She has been dying for years. Slowly, quietly, in the way that cancer takes its time with people it has chosen. She was a pianist, a good one, once. The kind of musician who played Wigmore Hall and toured with orchestras and received the particular kind of praise that never quite translates into fame. And then the illness came, and the years passed, and the world forgot her. The man looks at a recording and decides to give his wife the reputation the world refused her. What he does next will fool the greatest ears in classical music for 5 years and leave a question that nobody has been able to answer since. Joyce Hatto was born in London in 1928. She was, by all accounts, a genuinely gifted pianist. In the 1950s and 1960s, she performed across Britain and Europe, solo recitals at Wigmore Hall, concertos with the London Symphony Orchestra, recordings that received modest but genuine praise. She was not famous. She was not obscure. She existed in that particular middle territory that is harder to occupy than either extreme. Talented enough to be taken seriously, not exceptional enough to be remembered. In 1956, she married William Barrington-Coupe. He was a record producer, an impresario, a man with a shady past and a genuine love for music. He had been jailed in 1966 for fraud, a tax evasion case that the presiding judge described as blatant and impertinent frauds, carried out rather clumsily. He had set up and bankrupted multiple record labels. He had invented fictitious artists and orchestras to fill catalogs. He was, in other words, a man who had spent his career understanding that the music industry ran on names, on the story you told about a recording as much as the recording itself. In the late 1970s, Hatto was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She continued to play at home. She continued to record, quietly, in their house in Hertfordshire, while Barrington-Coupe produced and managed and loved her. But the world had stopped listening. By the mid-1980s, the arrival of CDs had made their cassette recordings commercially worthless. Barrington-Coupe watched his wife practice through her illness. He watched her play music that nobody would hear. And somewhere in the mid-1990s, he made a decision. The plan was, in its way, elegant. Barrington-Coupe began acquiring commercial recordings, CDs released by other pianists on major labels. He listened carefully, selecting performances that resembled what his wife might have played. Many of them had been recorded by pianists who had studied with the same teachers as Hatto. The technical approach was similar. The interpretive instincts were aligned. He then digitally manipulated the recordings, altering the tempo, shifting the pitch, changing the length, until they no longer matched the original in any way that casual comparison would reveal. And he released them, under his wife's name, on his own label, Concert Artist Recordings. 1 disc, then 10, then 50, then over 100. Beethoven sonatas, Mozart concertos, the complete Chopin etudes, Liszt's transcendental etudes, Rachmaninoff concertos, the entire standard repertoire of the concert piano, recorded, apparently, by a woman in her 70s, dying of cancer in a house in Hertfordshire. The critical world began to notice. A reviewer at Gramophone described her as producing performances of arresting beauty. Online forums for classical music enthusiasts started sharing her recordings like a secret. The Boston Globe called her the greatest living pianist that almost no one has ever heard of. Radio New Zealand devoted an hour-long special to her artistry. Critics competed to describe what they were hearing, the depth of her touch, the intelligence of her phrasing, the emotional authority that came through on every track. And here is where the story becomes something more than a fraud, because those critics were not wrong. The performances were extraordinary. The recordings were masterful. The emotional experience of listening to them was genuine, felt by real people, trained ears, experts who had spent their lives learning to hear. They were just listening to someone else. Among the discs Barrington-Coupe released were concertos, pieces that require a soloist, an orchestra, a conductor. He needed to explain the conductors, so he invented one. René Kohler, a Jewish child prodigy from Warsaw, barred from studying music under the Nazi occupation, his hand injured by a German soldier, deported to Treblinka, somehow survived, imprisoned in a Soviet labor camp until 1970, emerging, finally, as a conductor of quiet genius, unknown to the Western world. Critics printed the story, marveled at his resilience, wrote about his extraordinary life. René Kohler never existed. He was a name Barrington-Coupe invented for a conductor whose recordings he had stolen. Joyce Hatto died on June 29, 2006. She was 77 years old. Barrington-Coupe continued releasing recordings under her name after her death. In February 2007, 8 months after Hatto died, a critic named Jed Disler inserted one of her CDs into his computer. iTunes identified the recording automatically. It was not Joyce Hatto playing Liszt's Transcendental Etudes. It was Laszlo Simon, a Hungarian pianist, on the BIS label. Gramophone magazine began investigating. Within days, the scale of the fraud became clear. Recordings from at least 92 different pianists, hundreds of commercial CDs, a decade of deception that had fooled the most attentive ears in classical music. Barrington-Coupe initially denied everything. Then he wrote a letter to Robert von Bahr, the head of BIS Records, one of the labels he had stolen from. He confessed. He explained that he had tried to use Hatto's own recordings, but they were compromised by her illness, that he had found recordings that resembled hers, that he had done it because he wanted to give her the reputation she deserved, that she had known nothing about it. "I did it for my wife," he said. "I felt her career had been unfairly overlooked." Von Bahr considered suing him. In the end, he decided not to. He described it as a desperate attempt to build a shrine to a dying wife. Here's the question that has stayed with me since I first encountered this story. The critics who praised those recordings, who called them masterpieces, who described the emotional intelligence of the phrasing, who felt something real when they listened, were they wrong? The performances were genuine. The music was real. The emotional response it produced in trained, attentive listeners was authentic. The only thing that was false was the name on the cover. In the history of recorded music, we have always asked two separate questions and assumed they had the same answer. Is this good? And who made it? The Hatto case suggests that those questions can come apart, that the identity of the performer, the story we are told about whose hands are on the keys, changes what we hear in ways that have nothing to do with the sound waves reaching our ears. When critics heard Joyce Hatto, a dying woman, playing from illness and devotion, producing beauty from the ruins of her own body, they heard something that moved them. When they heard the same recording attributed to Laszlo Simon or Yefim Bronfman, they heard something different. The music had not changed. The story had. This is not a comfortable thought for anyone who believes that music exists independently of the narrative surrounding it, that sound is sound, that what we hear is what is there. The Hatto case suggests otherwise. It suggests that we do not listen to music. We listen to music plus everything we have been told about it, and that the two are inseparable in ways we have never fully understood. Joyce Hatto never played those recordings, but she changed how people heard them. That may be the most remarkable thing any pianist has ever done.